All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the 2-2 preview video. What I'd like to do before we preview 2-2 is return briefly to 2-1. And the reason for this is because everything that you learned in 2-1, and you might remember this reading, basically looking at the outcomes, oftentimes negative, of what happens when we use the word natural and apply it to people. Or the big picture that people make arguments by using the word natural, and they make claims that something is natural. But few things are, because as we know, nature and environment and all these words are always defined according to our needs or our values or whatever they are. And so this is a chapter that looked at that and looked specifically at what happens when you apply it to people. And we're going to take all those ideas from this chapter, from 2-1, and we're going to apply them to a few readings. In the current form of the course, you'll have to check if you're taking the course in the future after this video is made, make sure it's the same readings. But here are the readings right here. We'll be reading those, and you'll be looking for a number of things. But one thing that you'll be looking for in all the readings for 2-2 is looking at how is the idea of the natural used. Now remember, one thing that I really liked about the examples in the 2-1 reading by Sturgeon is that he gives a nice breakdown of advertisements and shows what this actually looks like when you look for it in our culture. He's not looking at poems or essays, which you will be, but he's doing something a little bit easier, which is something visual. But we'll be looking for the same ideas. So, if you'll recall this example right here, he basically said, okay, he asked his students, well, where's all these people are identified as natural in some way, right? Here's an animal, not even a person, clearly natural, right? Linked to the environment. And then an image of the sun as well, or maybe that's supposed to be a sun god or something like this. And he said, well, where's the white person in this? And they all pointed to the jet pilot, right? And this represents the civilized, right? The developed world, the height of technology. We're flying above the sky. You can't even see who's in there, right? But there is an assumption by the students this was the white person, this is maybe the American or the European or the first world, developed world person, right? And the rest not. And so you can see how we think of these things as natural. And are these people capable of being this? Sure, of course they are. Might they be from countries where they have jets? Yes, of course. But you can see how we stereotype certain people, certain ethnicities to be certain ways, and we have trouble seeing them as this other thing. That's what happens when even somebody that an organization as positive and as forward thinking and multicultural as the Discovery Channel might be, they can still have this strategy of defining nature through people as problematic. It stereotypes people, right? So the Discovery Channel didn't mean to do this. They probably meant no harm, right? But you can see what happens nonetheless is this distances people that look like this from this. It actually makes them more like this, more animal than human, we could say, even though that's maybe too simple, right? Other instances of this that you'll see in pop culture. Here's one that the reading brought up. Flower women. Women tend to blend into the landscape, right? They don't get to stand out. They don't get to act on the landscape or change it. And maybe that's teaching young women something about their own agency, right? It certainly shows us that ideas from Eve, that Eve is connected with nature and maybe nurtures nature in some way is good, but we don't really see them nurturing here. They're just kind of disappearing into nature. It's as if they're one. That might be a positive reading, but we have to say, well, there's always the people and the actions they take, and these people are taking no actions, right? Here we have, an ethnic-looking man, and he gets to disappear into nature as well, right? He doesn't get to act on nature. We then move into, here's our first white male, and what does he get to do? He gets to be exploring. He's out there. He's in Stetson country, right? And of course, these are images meant to make us buy things, but they show us what our society is and some of the assumptions we have, right? He gets to act on nature, splashing through and going for a hike and stuff like this, right? Here's a woman as pure. She's connected with nature, not acting on nature, sort of receiving it or something like this. So we can see some differences in what's going on here in the genders. Here's another one. Woman is purity. Notice that she's half animal, which is interesting. And so if we wanted to give a reading of this one, we could say this too represents the original, the purity, but it's a dark-skinned man. Well, why can't it be, a white-skinned man, right? Or why couldn't it be a woman, right? But they've chosen a dark-skinned man by buying this water. We can get back to some sort of primordial natural state, right? We can recapture it. And marketing does this to us, and these cultures exist in our, or these messages exist in our culture, right? So we can see these things. We saw a lot of animal sexuality as well in the way the women are represented as we keep going through. The last ones that are worth looking at that I found really fascinating is this one, that women are oftentimes connected with nature, as we know, going back to Eve, and are seen as the caretakers of nature. But this is the big point of the reading, that if you put women in here and it's sort of pregnancy, like she's pregnant with the earth, and it looks really cool, and maybe that's motivating, but it doesn't show other people who have more power, corporations, governments, the UN, that they are the people that should be here, right? So it's even the United Nations, but we don't see people from the United Nations there. It's not targeting them at all. Rather, the caretaker of the earth is a woman, right? Now, maybe that means women have to become the social activists. Why can't we have an image of the earth inside of a man, or a man's head, or a man's heart, or something like this? But you just don't see those things, right? Instead, what do we see over and over? The use of women and connecting women to the earth. Therefore, maybe excusing men, right, to some extent. Okay, so that's what we learned from the readings. I thought for fun, what we would do is take a look at how this argument for the natural appears other places. I like to connect what you're learning in the course, not just to literature and ways to read literature, but to things that we might see out in the real world, so to speak, not imaginative reading. Place we could go is something I mentioned in the previous video. We could go to vaccines and talk about the anti-vax movement or the pro-vax movement, right? So here's just a list of the pro and cons and the arguments given, kind of a neutral page. And we can look at the arguments and see if any of them use nature or the natural as an argument for or against vaccines. So I found some in the cons. Contain harmful ingredients that could be seen as being impure or unnatural in some way. So maybe that one is working off that, even though we have a lot of scientific info inside of there. The government should not intervene in medical choices. That sounds a lot like the natural rights that the U.S. was founded on, which is something the reading pointed out from 2.1, right? We tend to believe in natural rights. And we see that even more here. Mandatory vaccines infringe upon constitutionally protected religious freedoms. And we can go down here and we see it coming from actually religious discourse. Christian Scientist founder said that the calm Christian state of mind is a better preventative of contagion than a drug, right? The perfect love that casteth out fear is a sure defense, right? So against unnatural things. So this kind of works from this idea that of the natural, the body is natural, or the Christian mind is natural and can overcome sickness better than any sort of medication. And so we don't want to put medications into the body. We want to keep it pure. So we can see in here, we see some things that work from the state of, we could say purity, but it's also natural, right? The natural way. Also take a look at climate change denial myths, all right, and the type of arguments that climate change deniers look at. This is a course, after all, on the environment, and we're in our sustainability unit, so it makes sense to take a peek at these at least, even if we're in a literature course rather than a course that covers public rhetoric and what people argue in public. The climate's changed before is something that deniers say. That just says, well, it's natural. It always keeps on changing. We can't know it. We can't measure it. The humans don't have an effect. It's the sun. That would also just be natural. We can't control the sun. The sun naturally does what it wants, right? We see some don't align with that. Like there is no consensus is asking for a majority of people to believe it. That's not natural. An argument from nature, right? It's cooling. The earth is cooling. That would be an argument from nature. Again, the earth is bigger than us. It's just what the environment is doing. We're not having an effect on the environment, and it's not even changing in the way we think it is, right? Here's one more we can see in there. You can kind of scroll through and say, are any of these nature? Here's another one I see off the top of my head. Animals and plants can adapt. Nature adapts. It's evolutionary. We can think about Silent Spring here, and that we're changing things so fast that nature can't keep up, right? That was the argument of Silent Spring. We can see the opposite being used here by the climate change deniers, that animals and plants, even though it took tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years or millions to become what they are, will just simply quickly change within, several reproductive generations to this new earth and the new climate, right? And so we can see a lot of nature arguments being used here. This is something beyond us. It's just what nature is and does, and we don't need to worry about it so much, or we can't do anything about it in the first place. Here's one more fun one from a totally different sector of life, but I thought you'd all appreciate this. I looked at shampoo ads. This is from Allure magazine. Or I guess it's not a shampoo ad, but it is the 9 best natural ingredients for your hair. Look at natural ingredients. There's an assumption that they're better already. And what are they? They're the oils, clays, and herbs that can transform your hair. And we do mean transform. How could we read this just simply from the ideas of our course? There's a lot we could say about this and why it might be persuasive. But it says that nature is better somehow, right? We have the elements of nature here. Here's what I really liked. This might seem like a stretch to some of you, but it works with what we're talking about. Transforming your hair, taking it from some state of wildness into something that's more civilized, something that looks nicer, right? And in the modern world, we need nice looking hair. So at the same time that it argues for nature, it being better, right? It also says that to become civilized, you need more nature in your hair. Kind of interesting how that works. All right, everyone. With that, we can move to the poems. So we just got a nice review of how nature can be used as an argument. It can create problems, as we saw in the ads. We just see it as something that's meant to persuade people when we look at, say, climate change, denial arguments, or shampoo recommendations, or whatever it might be. So now what I want you to do is go in and look at these poems. Amy Lowell's Patterns. So I've got some questions here for you, but ask the regular questions you would ask. What does the title mean of a poem? What patterns are here? What are the patterns that we see? It's about a woman who's waiting for a man, essentially, is the gist of what the poem is about. So you can read through. And here's what you might want to look for. Is she associated with nature? Or is it the man associated with nature? If she's associated with nature, is that good and it works out for her in some way? Or is it in some way disempowering? So if she's associated with nature, and you would want to evidence that in your reading in the first place, then is it empowering or disempowering? That's going to get us back to what we learned in 2-1. We can learn the same thing from Rita Dove's Kentucky 1833. The interesting thing about Rita Dove's poem, Kentucky 1833, it is a poem. It looks like a couple of, like 3 paragraphs, right? So this is more, it's called a prose poem. And it reads kind of like almost a short story, but when you read the way that the lines, the sentences are delivered, it's going to sound more like metered poetry as well. So go through here and ask yourself the same question. Who or what, mainly who, is being associated with nature here, if anything? And is it empowering or is it disempowering? That's the big question we're trying to ask here. All right. And so Kentucky 1833. When you're done, I want you to read them both and see which one you like or you see more of this in, and then comment on one of them. And that's what I'm asking you to do. We'll then turn to some short essays. Gloria Anzaldua's El Retorno. You've got a nice introduction on Anzaldúa. So Anzaldúa comes from the mestizo culture right along sort of the Texas-Mexico border. Please read through here to get an idea of who she is, what her culture is. And that's going to help you read the poem. And there's questions to guide you through this. One of the big questions, again, is going to be, especially since she's writing this essay, what's her connection to the environment, her culture's connection to the environment? How does that compare to other things we've encountered in our course? And again, she's probably not going to write to disempower herself. So if she's situating her people as, natural in some ways, why is she empowered in the way that she uses the natural rather than disempowered, like we saw from many of the advertisements in the reading from the first module in this unit, right? And so that'll be a big question I want you to think about. What's the connection between her culture and nature? How do they use nature? What is she norming here as an appropriate way of living? Between nature, the spiritual, the cultural, maybe the economic or sustainability, survival, right? All those type of things. Nature is a resource. But then also, how is nature empowering? Probably not disempowering. She probably wouldn't disempower herself, right? So look for those and answer those questions and you're on track. And the same thing then for the last essay for today, Annie Dillard's The Deer at Providencia. And you want to do the same thing here. I've got some nice questions to get you started. You might look at, for this one, the conflict that is either the conflict in values between either the location where she is and the culture there and herself, or maybe there's sort of a battle, 2 sets of values going on in herself. But figuring out what the conflict is in this piece is going to help you then look at the same type of question that is driving this module. How is she defining nature? Is it empowering or disempowering? So link it back to that, and maybe you'll get some new ideas about how nature can empower or disempower. And you'll get some commentary on nature and culture and the fusion between the two as well. And so that'd be a great place to be. Thank you.